The Digital Duke. I keep the blinds open at night, even this high up. The city looks cleaner from a distance. The neons soften to a hush. The rivers of taillights braided into patience instead of rage. From this height, the towers stop looming and start listening. I pour tea the way Dr. Halvorsen taught me. Water just shy of boiling, leaves given time to become themselves. And I speak into the dark as if it were a microphone. That is how I tell this. Not as a confession, not as a boast, but as a broadcast to the one listener who needs it. I am Elliot Cross, and once upon a time, I believed the future was mine. Sometimes, before I begin, I turn off every screen and let the apartment be a single pane of glass. The HVAC hums as if the building is clearing its throat. I can pick out the late train on the bridge and the ambulance sighing along the avenue. The city has a repertoire, and I know where the rest go now. It was not always like this. There were years when the only music I could hear was the roaring in my own head, ledgers flipping in a wind that had no source and would not stop. I learned to breathe again. It is astonishing how long that can take. 1. The fall. In those days, I wore the same tailored navy suit at least 3 times a week, and no one noticed because it fit like certainty. I was the most promising junior partner at Carradine Hart, a bank that didn't just move money, it moved weather. If we shifted our weight, currencies readjusted their spines. I kept a photo of my mother in my desk drawer, and whenever a trade settled in our favor, I'd tap the frame twice. Superstition is simply accounting for what can't be audited. We had our rituals. A Monday stand-up that felt like a matinee, everyone pretending this wasn't a show. A Thursday drinks hour where the ice clinked with the exact rhythm of disclosure. I could chart my week by the way the assistants arranged the pastry plates. Croissants on days we were meant to be bold, madeleines on days we were meant to remember. Sophia Vale worked 2 floors above me, the senior analyst whose memos read like sheet music. She had a pianist's wrists and a litigator's patience. We drank coffee in the same glass-walled conference room every Friday at 7:10 because 7 o'clock was for people who wanted to be watched. We weren't a couple. We were a hypothesis we didn't dare test while the lab was on fire. "You're too honest," she told me once, and when she saw my face she amended, "For this place." "Honest men built it," I said. She shrugged. "So did opportunists with excellent tailors." She would mark up my models with a pencil because ink felt like arrogance. "Assume they lie," she'd say, circling a footnote. Not about the number, about the purpose. There was a promotion on the horizon, which meant other people's smiles grew expensive. Marcus Quinn, a co-partner with the gleam of an heirloom knife, called me kid in public and cross in private. He had a talent for remembering your birthday after forgetting your name. He'd lean against door frames as if doors had been invented for his elbows. Layla Carter ran a hedge fund that hunted fear the way falcons hunt thermals. She'd call sometimes, late, to ask my view on a currency pair or a rumor about a regulator's new appetite. Her voice always sounded like she sat at the far end of a marble table that caught the light just so. People said she could make a bond blush. Gideon Ward was the city prosecutor who shook our hands at charity dinners and promised to keep the streets clean of unlicensed ambition. He had a jaw built by a committee and a laugh calibrated for microphones. He'd tell a joke about his first year in public service, and you could hear the donors' checkbooks smiling. The day the net tightened, I ate a croissant with too much almond paste and thought the sweetness was a good omen. By noon I was suspended. By evening I was in handcuffs. They built a web so tight the net caught me before I knew I was in it. I say now, and it still surprises me that the line is accurate and not poetry. The evidence was immaculate. Transfers I didn't make, keystrokes I didn't type, approvals I didn't grant. My workstation logs showed late-night access routed through a proxy that mimicked our own compliance gateway, the sort of trick that only works if the building already trusts the badge. The security video showed me arriving at the server room at 3:12 a.m. in a gray hoodie and leaving at 3:29 with a backpack. The face was mine. The gate was mine. The man was not. At the station, they let me call one person. I called Sophia. She didn't ask if I did it. "Where are you?" she said. "Midtown South," I said. I almost said, "Okay." I was not. "I'm coming," she said. She arrived with her hair unbrushed, and her eyes steady. She touched the plexiglass with her palm. "They've been laying this track for months," she whispered. "Marcus has been meeting Layla in that private dining room on 54th. Gideon's chief of staff has been friendlier than usual." "Then it's already done," I said. "Not if we make them pronounce it," she replied. It was the sort of sentence that made me love her and fear for her at the same time. Gideon Ward visited the way a meteorologist visits a hurricane, professionally. "Elliot," he said, "we both know how this goes. Good people make bad choices in bad systems. Help us unwind it, and you can go home in time to watch the evening news call you a cautionary tale." I looked at his cufflinks. They had the city seal etched so lightly you had to know it was there to see it. "You're a man who loves a story with an ending," I said. "But this isn't yours." He smiled as if he pitied me. "Oh, but it is, son. The arraignment was theater. The judge had a plane to catch. Someone had greased the runway. Without bail, I went where the city sends its expensive mistakes. The ride to Fort Lock was a geography lesson. Bridges you're not supposed to notice. Water that knows too much. A bus whose windows had decided transparency was an opinion. We unloaded beneath a concrete lip that turned rain into a curtain. The skyline looked near enough to touch on clear days, which was cruel, but mercy has never been a line item in any budget. The first night, I learned the language of steel and silence. Every door had a voice, and every voice said no. The fluorescent lights did not buzz so much as insist. I lay on a mattress that remembered other backs and thought about the word innocent. It is not a shield. It is a seed that requires weather you cannot control. It was also the night I learned that betrayal can be engineered from a line of code or a single false signature. That is a kind of intimacy most marriages never achieve. 2. The mentor. Prison is a clock you carry in your mouth. If you speak too much, time goes slow. If you swallow it, time lodges in your throat. I learned to talk only when the walls forgot to listen. On the third day, a guard whose eyes were too kind for the job stopped at my cell and coughed in a careful rhythm. Short, long, short. Then he moved on. Later, after lights out, a cough returned from 2 doors down. Long, short, long. It would have been nothing, except nothing is the only thing you can afford to overvalue in a place like that. They moved me to solitary for your own protection, which is bureaucratic for your visibility doesn't suit our needs. The cell smelled of mildew and possibility. That is where I met Dr. Halvorson. He was older than winter and younger than guilt. When I first saw him, he sat cross-legged on the lower bunk, measuring the room with a mathematician's indifference. In the concrete, he had found seams. In the seams, he had found doors. His hair had retreated like a tide that knew better, and his hands were the color of books. "Elliot Cross," he said without looking up, as if reading a statement he had written long ago. "How do you know because you were careless enough to be honest in a system that expects fluency in duplicity." He smiled as if he were quoting an old joke. "And because someone placed you near me. Wisdom is a contraband the warden can't catalog." "Who placed me?" "The same people who took you," he said, "and the same people who will regret it." He patted the bunk. "Sit. Learn the difference between secrecy and discretion." He showed me a terminal built from scraps of old satellite phones, braided wire, and an attitude toward rules so elegant it looked like good manners. It fit into an empty cinder block that once held a blank. "You could trade one blank for another in any architecture," he said. "Prisons are architectures. So are banks." "We don't have internet," I said. "We have the sky," he said and pointed, "and the sky doesn't need permission. Permission just likes to think it's the sky." We wrote messages in the margins of expected tasks, encrypted in the pauses between coughs, or in the rhythm of pinging pipes when the guards got lazy with maintenance. He taught me cryptography the way my mother taught me to tie my shoes, once, correctly, and with the expectation I would never pretend to forget. For a time, I felt less like a victim and more like a student of the dark arts. I tell you, and you must forgive the romance in that phrase. Romance is how we justify survival when it looks too much like cunning. He taught me zero-knowledge proofs, how to convince a skeptical world that you know the password without ever speaking it. He drew it with chalk. A door, a cave, a friend waiting on the far side. "The trick," he said, "is to make truth measurable without making it harvestable." He taught me digital forensics, how to read the fingerprints greed leaves on a ledger when it thinks it is wearing gloves. Everyone imagines they are the exception to entropy, he said. They are wrong, and that's good news if you are patient. He taught me the physics of money, how it falls, how it pools, how it evaporates under scrutiny and reappears somewhere slightly more convenient. He mapped offshore shells like constellations and made me say the names until they sounded like weather. And he taught me the ethics of infiltration in a century that had replaced walls with terms of service. If you become what you hate to defeat what you hate, he said, you have built them a second home. Why are you here? I asked him once we trusted the pipes. I told the truth in a room that had hired me for my discretion, he said. It is not a complicated story. It is just expensive. When he finally spoke about escape, he did not lower his voice. If the warden is listening, he said, let him learn something. The plan involved the prison's digital lock system, which had been purchased at a discount from a contractor who specialized in discounting essential things. There was a vault beneath the main block, he said, built in a century when the island belonged to a family that believed in hiding their silver and steel. The vault is a secret door in the heart of the cage, he said. On the far side is a sealed wallet with a name you'd enjoy, Monte Cristo, and something old-fashioned, so your hands don't forget weight. Gold. Why tell me this? I asked. Why trust me? Because I'm nearer to the end of my ledger than the beginning, he said. Because you are an honest man who has learned the price of it. Because I cannot leave, and you must. He pressed a small cloth bundle into my palm, a tea strainer and a thumb drive. For when water is hotter and time is kinder, he said. 3. Escape. The night we chose had rain, which is the closest thing to forgiveness the sky offers concrete. Even in fiction, this is where people expect a blueprint, a list of parts, a timing diagram. I will not give you that. The difference between an escape story and an instruction manual is an audience of one who thinks he is special enough to attempt it. It is enough to say, the cameras saw what we asked them to see, the sensors heard what we asked them to hear, and the doors forgot themselves long enough for me to remember who I had been before the cuffs. The walls cracked like a hard drive under a surge of electricity. There is music in the sound systems make when they're taught a better logic. The storm did the rest. Dampened footfalls, misted lenses, made every echo plausible. Somewhere a guard radioed a question into a channel that had been set to admire its own silence. Dr. Halvorsen and I moved with the patience of men who have learned that hurry is how you show the world your back. The vault was where he said it would be. The lock preferred flattery to force. Inside, the air tasted like a century. I found the wallet, embossed with a name that made me laugh despite everything. Monte Cristo. I held it as if it might bite and felt the bite anyway, fear turning back into appetite. There were bricks of gold that reminded me of a childhood museum trip with my father, his hand heavy on my shoulder as he said, "This is what money used to look like when it wanted to be seen." I took enough to remember gravity. "Come with me," I said. He shook his head. "I would slow you," he said. "And my war is quieter now. Go, write me a better ending." On the surface, I wore a face that did not belong to me. The documents were elegant frauds, the biometrics a conversation between old scars and new intentions. I left the prison as Alexander Delacourt, a man I had never been and would become long enough to be useful. At the dock, a maintenance skiff coughed awake like an old dog remembering its purpose. Rain made a sheet between the island and the city. When the skyline finally took me in, it felt less like arrival than like conditional acceptance. In the darkness, I was reborn into a world where I could write my own code. 4. The digital empire. Revenge requires liquidity. Justice requires proof. I learned to hold both in each hand without spilling. Monte Cristo LLC registered in an office that was always open and never staffed. A Panamanian trust sprouted like a fig tree in an imported courtyard. Shelf companies waved their clean paperwork like little white flags. I moved the Monte Cristo wallet into a series of rooms only I could enter, and then I added a room even I could not enter without the ritual of remembering. With every transaction, the world's financial system became my playground. I say, And if that sounds arrogant, know that my arrogance was administrative. Every move documented, every ledger double-kept, every audit performed by the part of me that still worried my mother would see a headline. I rented a small office with an excellent view of fiber maps. I hired a woman named Daria, whose gift was making compliance officers purr. I paid accountants who had opinions about adjectives. I hired lawyers who liked footnotes more than adjectives. I learned to speak to all of them without using the word revenge. I bought real estate not for the marble, but for the fiber optic in the walls. I invested in startups that made governments nervous and governments that made startups civilized. I wrote a blog as the Count, short essays about integrity disguised as puzzle boxes about cryptography, and the right people began to whisper. Who is the new king of crypto? They asked on panels in rooms that served flat, sparkling water and an attitude toward chairs that made backs optional. I avoided cameras and cultivated silhouette. The silhouette did most of my work. At a conference in Lisbon, a man who introduced himself as a thought leader asked me what I believed in. Receipts, I said. He thought I was joking. I wasn't. I watched Sophia from a distance, as a starving man watches a kitchen he built but no longer has keys to. She had been promoted. Under Layla Carter's tolerance, she had learned to breathe in air that smelled like leverage. She still wore the same gold stud earrings when she had to pretend her heart wasn't in the room. I learned the cadences of her emails, the way she asked a question when she was really handing someone a parachute, the way she omitted a courtesy when she needed the absence to be heard. It is a strange intimacy to love a mind through metadata. Sophia had always believed in the dignity of evidence. So I gave her some. The emails I leaked were not fireworks. They were boring on purpose. The world is saved more often by spreadsheets than swords. She wrote a memo that exhibited the evidence with a surgeon's calm. The board, under pressure from regulators who had been tipped anonymously, asked Layla to explain herself. Her explanation leaked before it finished leaving her mouth. I called Sophia on a number that erased itself. Who are you? She asked. An old hypothesis, I said. Silence. Then, you sound taller. Escape does that, I said. Elliot, she whispered, and a decade collapsed in a syllable. I need you out of there, I said. Not because you can't survive it. Because I want you to survive as yourself. You're dead, she said. It was an accusation. It was accounting. Then consider this a haunting, I said. And a job offer. I told her about the foundation I intended, the investments aligned with the version of the world we had once argued could be built without breaking too many bones. I will come back for you in person when the last piece is in place, I said. Before the final act. You always did like theater, she said. Only when the audience can leave better than they arrived. Cross, she said softly, don't die twice. Once was sufficient, I said. Money alone could not undo betrayal. Trust would require interest and patience. So I practiced the small interest of trust, arriving on time, paying early, answering slowly when anger would have been easy. Power is a loud room. Integrity is a door you keep oiled. 5. The Count scheme. Marcus Quinn first. He had carved his name into a rival conglomerate, mistaking scale for safety. Men like Marcus assume their servers are loyal because their assistants are. It is a category error. I did not hack so much as listen. Companies speak to each other all day in a language no one but algorithms take seriously. I learned to overhear. The dossier I compiled documented illegal offshore accounts, straw men who had never seen the islands where their signatures kept summer homes, and a habit of laundering risk until it came out the color of return. I did not release it with fanfare. I let it leak through outlets that prided themselves on boring accuracy. When the market sank, I'm ashamed to say, the sound of my laugh surprised me. It was not cruel. It was relief delivered at volume. I watched from a distance. The morning he tried to stabilize the stock on live television. He spoke about fundamentals. The cheering beneath him listed shell companies like aliases. His tie looked like it had been tightened by an enemy. Layla Carter owned a criminal empire the way philanthropists own foundations, at arm's length and with a lawyer's grin. I offered her a honeypot, an instrument that looked like yield and smelled like discretion. She trusted her ledger more than any lover. The ledger took her into its arms, and siphoned millions through a shape that looked exactly like the shadow she'd used for others. When she called the authorities already had a file ready with her name on the tab. Someone had tipped them. She was indicted on a Thursday. She wore gray to court, as if the wall behind her had dressed her by consensus. At the courthouse steps, a reporter asked if she had anything to say to her investors. "I trusted the wrong people," she said, and for a half second her eyes flicked toward a camera that was not broadcasting because it was mine. Gideon Ward required theater. The video of his bribery was not captured by my ingenuity. Men like Gideon always perform for an audience they pretend isn't there. The trick is finding a theater with a better signal. I obtained the footage. How is less important than why, and I released it to a journalist who had once written about a bus driver who returned a found wallet with all the cash and a note that said, "We are all custodians." When the story ran, Gideon's laugh did not match the microphones anymore. He resigned before lunchtime. In the evening, the news called it a surprise. Sophia texted a number that was no longer supposed to be able to receive texts. "Be careful," she wrote. "Pianos have long memories." The minor conspirators were dealt with individually. A job evaporated here, an alibi there, a visa declined at exactly the wrong time. I did not need to push. Gravity is a patient artist when you remove the scaffolding. One man found that the charity on whose board he had laundered his intentions had posted its minutes with unusual candor. Another discovered that the college where he lectured on ethics had reconsidered whether applause was a credential. Revenge is a game of chess. I was the king. They were all pawns. But here is the part one did not know at the beginning. The king is also the slowest piece, and being untaken is not the same as being free. Sometimes at night, I would wake with a certain sense that I had miscounted, that there was one more move on the board with my name on it. That is what conscience feels like when it is doing inventory. 6. The final move. I invited them all to a gala. No one refuses a stage if they have ever been clapped for. The Foundation for Digital Integrity launched in a museum that looked like it had always intended to host apologies. The sponsorship list read like a syllabus for a course in reputational laundering. Cameras glided like benevolent hawks. The invitation had been signed by the Count. We dressed the room in restraint. White walls, a piano, the kind of floral budget that whispers. The donor wall listed names that had purchased the right to be adjacent to virtue. The caterers served hors d'oeuvres that tasted like texture. Everything about the evening said, "We have done nothing wrong." That is how you get people to show up. Sophia stood near the piano and wore black without looking apologetic about it. When our eyes met, the old hypothesis resolved into a proof that did not require publication. She nodded once, the kind of nod that says, "Proceed." Marcus arrived with a jaw set to, "What are you going to do? Arrest me at a benefit." Layla wore a dress like a redaction. Gideon had shaved. The others who had contributed to my ruin came because the richest man in the room, whoever he was, might be taking applications for absolution, and you never want to be late to a line like that. When the lights went out, no one screamed. This was a room that considered fear déclassé. The screens lit up in their place. Numbers, names, signatures, audio recordings that did not need captions. If a museum can have a heart, this one offered its atrium. I walked onto the stage. Alexander Delacourt's Taylor had done excellent work. The microphone recognized my voice and introduced me as the Count. Then I took off the mask I had never worn and said, "My name is Elliot Cross." Silence is softer when money is listening. Somewhere a glass found a table by intuition. I told the story the way I have told it to you, except the edges were sharper and the jokes shorter. I named the conspiracy that had made me a parable, and I returned the lesson to its authors. I did not accuse. I exhibited. The night the lights went out, I said, the truth was illuminated. Security moved in the body language of choreography. The conspirators looked smaller under honesty's wattage. I could have ordered them off the stage in handcuffs or off the planet through less legal corridors. I had thought about it in those late hours when justice and violence lie to each other about their resemblance. I chose differently. I could kill each of you, I said, and a few people laughed the way wealthy rooms laugh at bad metaphors. But I will not. I brought you here so that the systems you paid for, flattered, ignored, and weaponized can now own you. You will be charged by laws you tried to rent. You will be tried by juries you forgot were citizens. You will be punished by a society you called a market. I turned to the cameras. My revenge, I said, is a justice that can be carried forward. Later, on the terrace, the city turned its face up for air. I found Sophia by the rail. Up close, she looked like a truth no story can improve. I'm sorry, I said. For what? She asked. For being accused? Or for becoming interesting? For making you learn resilience you should never have needed, I said. She looked out toward the river. I love the boy, she said. I respect the man. The rest is work. We can leave it, I said. All of it. The empire. The name. I almost said power, but she hates that word the way good people hate disposable cutlery. We walk away, she said, or we stand above it. Not on it. Together, I said, and felt the evening finally register its temperature. We did not kiss. Some vows do not need ceremony. We walked back in and finished our water as if the night had been about that all along. 7. The legacy. Settling my affairs was easier than starting them. I moved the assets that felt like evidence into a trust with Sophia's name on it, and the ones that felt like temptation into a foundation that would teach kids to think like auditors and dream like engineers. Code classes in neighborhoods that think code is for parking violations. Scholarships for the sort of mind that reads a fence and sees a network. We rented a storefront and turned it into a lab where laptops were treated like instruments instead of weapons. A whiteboard at the back said, "Tools obey their users. Choose wisely." Asterisk asterisk, a girl named Maya taught me a new way to explain hashes by telling me how her grandmother braided her hair. A boy named Luis wrote a script that checked the claims of predatory lenders against public data. He said it felt like taking a splinter out of his mother's hand. I wanted to give others the keys that once opened my prison, I tell you, and I mean prison both literally and as the plural of habit. News outlets did the thing news outlets must do. They call me a legend and a cautionary ghost, alternately. I am neither. I am a competent man who learned to be decent the hard way. If that makes you a myth, the culture has an appetite I do not care to feed. The blog I wrote, as the Count, became an open-source archive where anyone with a browser could consider how to build systems that reward transparency before applause. I published tools you could only use ethically if you wanted them to work at all. The comment sections were kind for 3 days, suspicious for 3 months, and useful to people I will never meet for much longer than that. On the last day, the board of Carradine Hart sent me a letter that sounded like a settlement and felt like a neighbor apologizing for the noise. I donated the windfall to a quiet program that teaches prosecutors to measure success by exonerations as well as convictions. Gideon Ward did not write to thank me. He had other correspondence to manage. Sophia and I lived in the same city without making real estate the point of our togetherness. Some mornings we walked across the park and she would say, "Do you hear the chords in the traffic?" And I would pretend I had always known what she meant. Some evenings we ordered noodles and watched documentaries about ships. I learned to enjoy stories that do not require an enemy. On Sundays, we made a ceremony of ordinary things. A market, a vase, a window jacketed with steam from soup. We argued about the dishwasher and the ethics of owning more than 3 pairs of shoes. We lost keys. We misplaced patience. We apologized twice, not because it was necessary, but because it made the other person's day shorter. When a gale rattled the windows of this high-rise loft, we sat on the floor with tea and let the storm tell us its schedule. Sometimes I woke to find Sophia reading comments on the archive, smiling at the way teenagers can be ferocious and precise. "They don't worship you," she said. "Good." I nodded. The only altar I deserved was the one in the kitchen, where water waits to be made useful. We all write our own endings, I say into the night. The code is yours. 8. Epilogue. A teenager in a city where the elevators sometimes pretend to be stairs finds the archive late, after homework, before sleep. She reads the manifesto about zero-knowledge trust and decides to show her mother how to prove a paycheck without surrendering a life's worth of details to a predatory lender. She forks the code and removes the vanity from my comments. She will not be a count. She will be a citizen, and that will be her rank. In a different neighborhood, a boy who thinks numbers are an insult discovers that numbers can be forgiveness when used to reconcile the book that poverty keeps. He makes an app that translates receipts into choices and gives it away for free because his grandmother says a gift is not a gift if it requires a receipt. A teacher prints a page from the archive and tapes it to the classroom door. You are allowed to know how the world works. A public defender bookmarks a tool and uses it to argue that a client's digital footprint is a story, not a sentence. A clerk in a municipal office runs a script on the bidding records and finds something that will make next year's news easier to believe. Every city is a choir you can only hear from far enough away to listen. I am old now. The tea is better because the water is patient. The skyline has taught me not to mistake brightness for benevolence. The sun climbs from the river like a hand that knows the work, and the towers flicker as if they, too, are being reborn. I remember the rain the night I left Fort Locke, and I am grateful that storms repeat themselves only in form, not in consequence. I leave the blinds open. I keep speaking, not because I like the sound of my voice, but because somewhere a listener needs to know that survival can be elegant, and that vengeance can learn to call itself something gentler.